Hey, it's Tony here, and today I'm going to show you some simple processing steps on Messier 27, or known as the Dumbbell Nebula. I'm going to show you some steps using Siril, StarNet, and Photoshop, along with some tips and tricks on how you recombine a starless image with a star mask image. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my file. And this is a FITS file here, so I'm going to double click on it to bring it into Siril. Now, this file is a result of using Siril previously to do an alignment and stacking and registration process to get us to this stage here in the processing. You'll notice here when you look at the image, it's super dark and you're not really seeing much. That's because the mode that I'm in Siril is in a linear mode here. If I click here and select auto stretch, you can see the view drastically changes. And I haven't changed the file at all. I'm simply looking at a different viewing mode. And there's a couple of things I'll call out in this image. You'll notice that there's some, let's call them stacking artifacts, where some of the frames didn't quite overlap perfectly. And so we're going to crop those out. The other thing I'll call out is there seems to be a gradient. And what I mean by that is you've got a very dark area here on the bottom right. And if you go all the way over to the left, even allowing for the nebulosity of the nebula itself, the sky seems to be a little bit brighter. So we've definitely got some kind of gradient here. It may have been neighbors' lights, it may be street lights, but something has caused that, but we'll fix that also. The first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to hold down my left mouse button in Windows, and I'm going to scroll up, and we're going to select an area here so we can kind of crop out this extraneous stacking artifact, if you will. And I'm going to right click on crop and crop. And now you see that's kind of gone away. The next thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and address this background gradient. And there's a number of methods in Siril you can use. If I go up to scripts here and Python scripts, you can see, for example, if I go to processing, there's this stage here called auto BGE. That's one way of doing a background extraction. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to use a Python script that uses the GraXpert AI to reduce the background. So I'm going to click on here and I'm going to run the script. And what happens is GraXpert will bring up a dialog box that we see here. I'm just going to accept the default settings, background extraction, the model or the AI model. I'm just going to select the default that's here, and I'm going to leave everything else, as I say, just at default. Click on apply. And you see what happens is the correction is now taking place, and it moved along at a pretty rapid clip. If I go ahead and close this dialog and do a before is before, and then here's after. And I think you would agree that the gradient across the sky is definitely kind of evened out a little bit. The next thing we're going to do in Siril is we're going to do what's called plate solving. And I'm going to go up to Tools, Astrometry, and then Image Plate Solver. It also brings up a dialog box here. All this does is it kind of helps Siril understand essentially the image that you're looking at and some of the capture parameters that you used when you collected your image. And I'm just going to select all the defaults here and just click OK. And you can see that it's contacting the server and it's going to do a plate solve, and it's done. And you can see here on the right hand side here, it's collected some information about the image, which will come in useful for Siril in the next few steps. I'm now going to go over and do what's called a color calibration. So I'm going to go to image processing and then color calibration. And I'm going to select Spectrophotometric Color Calibration. Click here, and then another dialog box comes up. And you'll notice I can actually select the sensor type for my camera that I used for this image. So I used a one-shot color camera. The sensor, you can see you can select different sensors here. I know that mine was a Sony sensor, and then the camera had a default UV IR block filter on by default. I'm going to click OK. And when I do that, you'll see that the color of the nebula very subtly changed. So let's do a before. So it's a little bit more yellowish to my eyes. And then let's do an after. So it's a little bit more bluish. So we're going to accept these changes. The next thing I want to do or to call out is you'll notice in this image, if I really zoom in using the mouse wheel in Windows, you will see the stars are very, very slightly oblong shaped. And that can be from a number of parameters. It can be the seeing conditions that were around when I captured these images. It could be a slight offset or slight error in the tracking that I used in my telescope. But the good news is for such a slight oblong shape, we can go into scripts and go to Python scripts, processing, and then there's a thing called aberration remover here. I'm going to select that, run the script, and it too will also bring up a dialog box. And you see here, the script was created by Ricardo. He's done a great job. We're leveraging AI here to do the correction. And I'm just going to select all the defaults. So I'm just going to click on calculate. And you can see here it's doing the process. It takes just a few seconds for it to go through. You can see here it's going through a number of passes on the different channels and takes about maybe 5 or 10 seconds to do that. And you see here, process complete. Let's go ahead and close that. And now I'm going to do a before. See, the stars are very, very slightly oblong, and then an after. And look at that. The stars are definitely more circular. So we'll accept those changes. So that's kind of good news for us. And let's bring the image back into 100% view by clicking on this box down here in Siril. And then the next thing we want to do is you can see in the image that there's an awful lot of stars. And some people want to kind of reduce the stars so they have less of a, let's call it an aesthetic impact on the image. A lot of it is personal preference. Sometimes, depending on the day, I may just leave the stars in the image. So you've got sort of a real view. Or maybe sometimes I'll reduce the stars so the nebula itself and the surrounding nebula is less obscured. So today, I'm going to go ahead and remove the stars. And to do that, there are a number of ways in Siril you can do this. So if I go to scripts and then Python scripts, and then if I go to the menu here, you can see there's one called RC Astro. This is a recent change into Siril where there's a program called Star Exterminator. And this is a paid software that integrates nicely into Siril. There are other ways. If you go down to here, there is Scicon. So Scicon has a starless Python script, which is no charge. There's also another one, which if I go to processing, there's one called StarNet, also a free AI machine learning for reducing stars. I think today, just for all intents and purposes, and I definitely encourage you to try different methods, we're going to go ahead and use StarNet. So I'm going to click on that, run the script, and it will bring up a dialog box. And I'm just going to select all the defaults, of which one thing it will do is the end result will be, I'll see an image with no stars, and then it will also create what's called a star mask, which is the image only with the stars. So I'm going to go ahead and run StarNet. Now, StarNet will leverage your GPU or your graphics processing unit. So if you've got a fairly powerful GPU, then StarNet can run at a pretty rapid clip. If you've got a slower GPU, it may just decide to leverage your CPU on your computer, which can maybe take several minutes to complete. But you can see in this particular example, StarNet is definitely moving on at a fairly rapid clip in about, what are we seeing here? About another 30 seconds, 20 seconds or so, StarNet will be completed. And then we'll go ahead and we'll see the image or the end result after StarNet has completed. And once it's done that, as I say, you'll see a starless image will appear on the screen. And so it's completed and finishing up. And then here we have the image from StarNet, which is with the stars removed. I'm going to go ahead and close this dialog box. And you can see here, we now have this outer nebula area. It is far less obscured by stars. But then you look at this, go, hold on, Tony, wait a minute. If I look at this, there's all this weird mottling in the background. Well, if you remember at the beginning, I was in auto stretch view, and that's where I'm still at right now. So there's almost like a artificially harsh stretch on the image. I'm going to go into linear mode. And when I do that, you can see that a lot of that background effect has disappeared a little bit. And we can potentially go in and do some stretches and whatnot. But for all intents and purposes, the next stage we want is to do some sharpening and then some noise reduction on the nebula. So I'm going to go back into auto stretch, and I'm going to go to another script. This one is under Python scripts processing, and it's the cosmic clarity set of scripts. I'm going to run the script, and it too will also bring up a dialog box, and that will decide how much sharpening and where we want the sharpening to take place. So in cosmic clarity, I'm going to select non-stellar only, because that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. There are no stars here. I'm going to leave the strength all the way across to 1, and I'm going to click on run. Now it too, again, because I've got a pretty powerful computer, it will run along at a fairly rapid clip. You can see that the percentage here is moving on at a nice speed. And once it's completed, which will tell us that in a few seconds, there we go, complete. I'm going to now close this, and I'm going to use my mouse wheel again to zoom in just a little bit. And then here's the before, sharpening, and then here's after. So you see these very subtle changes in the, let's call them filaments or the cloud areas in the nebula. So the sharpening's done a really nice job here, but we've got a little bit of noise appearing in the background by these mottled effects. So we're going to now go in and do a noise reduction. So I'm going to go scripts, Python scripts, processing, and then we're actually going to go back to GraXpert. You may have noticed also there is another option. So if I go up to RC Astro, you can see there's a noise exterminator option, which you can purchase from RC Astro. Again, I encourage you to try out all these different tools, but for all intents and purposes for this particular video, let's go ahead and use GraXpert. I'm going to run the script, and GraXpert will bring up its dialog box. This time, instead of background extraction using GraXpert, I want to choose denoising. It shows me what AI model I'm going to use. I just leave everything at default. We'll leave the strength at about halfway, and then I'm going to click on apply. Now, this denoising process is also going to leverage the graphics processing unit if available. And as I mentioned, I've got a pretty powerful NVIDIA, I think it's a 5060 NVIDIA graphics card in my PC. Some of you may not have that, and so this process may take a little bit longer to do the denoising. And so you can see here, it's moving along at a fairly rapid clip. We're tracking at about 1% every second or so. So we'll give it about another 20 or 30 seconds to complete. And I won't skip the video. We'll just let it run. And then after we've done this, I'm going to show you some more processing steps for the nebula part. So again, let's give it about another 20 seconds to complete. And then once we see that, once we see it completed, I can then give you a before and after view for the denoising process. And hopefully we'll see some very subtle changes in the amount of noise in the image. Bear in mind, though, I am still in auto stretch mode down here, and we're going to change that in a few moments. So it looks like it's just about completed, and yes, it's done. Let's go ahead and close that. Now, if I do a before, and then I do an after. So it is a little hard to see in terms of the impact on the noise until we actually go and to do some processing further down the line. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to get out of auto stretch. I'm going to go into linear mode, and then I'm going to go into, let's see here, not stretches. I'm going to go into the scripts, Python scripts, and then there's a series of scripts here called under the banner of VeraLux. I'm going to select a hypermetric stretch Python script, and you see what happens when I run that. So it brings up a dialog box. Interestingly, it allowed me to select my sensor profile. As I said at the beginning, I'm using a 571 Sony chip for my one-shot color camera. I can go in and look at live preview, so any changes that I make. And then I'm just going to click on defaults here and then go back, select the camera. I'm going to click on Auto Calc Log D. What this does is kind of optimizes the stretch based on all the settings that you selected here. And you can see in the live preview, it's definitely kind of made a difference by doing this stretch. And if I click on process, I can show you that in a little more detail. It just takes just a few seconds to complete, and it's done. Let's close all this down. And now if I do a before, and then do an after, you can see that stretch has definitely taken place. The next thing we want to do is then go in and look at some of this background area here. So if I zoom out, you can see there's some lightness and sort of this mottling effect, even though we're now in linear view. So one thing I like to do is I go into image processing stretches, curves transformation, and it brings up a dialog box here. And at the very, very bottom left, if I hold down my left mouse button and drag the black point, I'm going to kind of darken the background areas. Now, you see it does that quite nicely in the background. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in this particular example, just to kind of darken the background just a little bit more to kind of reduce some of that mottling effect. Definitely encourage you to play around with this yourself as well. And so there we go. It's kind of really dark in that background. You notice there's a little setting here that says clip percentage. So we want to make sure that we don't kind of go too crazy here and move this all the way along. And you see that number goes really high and the background is just unnaturally dark. So let's just back this off a little bit. Let's go in, let's just take it around here. There we go. That'll do for now. I am clipping the image a little bit. As you can see by this 11%, but I just want to demonstrate to you to kind of reduce some of that background mottling. So I'm going to click on apply and then close. And then the last thing I like to do is there's another tool here under scripts, Python scripts, again under VeraLux, and it's called Revealer. And so I'm going to bring up that dialog box. And what it does is it kind of helps us optimize some of the contrast. So I'm going to use my mouse wheel to zoom in, and I'm going to move the texture to about halfway, and then the structure to about 25%. And you can see what that's done is it's really kind of emphasized some of these fine areas within the nebula. And so I'm going to click on process. And if I zoom in here, look at that. We're really starting to expose or emphasize some of these cloud areas within the nebula quite nicely. So I think for the nebula part, I would say that's pretty much done. There's still this mottling here, which we can maybe reduce that a little bit more if we wanted to, but we don't want to go too crazy because otherwise this outer nebula area, we can also kind of reduce that also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this And let's just call it NEB dash for nebula. And we're going to save it as a fit file. So click on save and 32-bit fit, save. Now let's go ahead and open up the star mask. All right, so I've got my star mask image open now, and I'm in linear view. And the first thing I want to do is do a little bit of a stretch on this so I can bring out and emphasize some of the stars. So I go to image processing, stretches. I'm going to do an async transformation. And the reason I do that is it performs a stretch, but helps retain some of the color information in the stars. So I'm going to drag this over to around, let's go for around 200. And you see the stars have appeared a little bit. So click on apply. And then the next thing I want to do is go into stretches and then do a histogram transformation stretch. And I'm going to move the slider, this middle slider, over to the left to about here. And you see there's a lot more stars have appeared. So I'm going to maybe back that off just a little bit so we don't kind of overload the nebula part of the finished image. So click on apply and then close. And I'm going to go ahead and save this as, let's call it processed or proc star mask. And then click on save as a 32-bit image and save, done. Okay, so now I've got basically two images. I've got the starless nebula and I've got this star image. And now I want to combine them together. In Siril, there's a number of ways you can do a recombination. And I'll show you those from the menu standpoint. So go to image processing and star processing. And there's a star recomposition option. So if I click on that, show and close the image. If I click on that, it brings up this dialog. And what that allows you to do is you can select the nebula image, and then you can select the star image, and it will combine those two together. So that's one option. Definitely encourage you to play around with this. The other one you can do is under scripts, Python scripts, and another VeraLux script, which is called Star Composer. So if I click on that, and then similar to the previous one, you would select your nebula image and your star mask image, and then it will combine those two together. So there's two options. There is a third option, which is a bit more, I would say complicated, but I found I get quite good results using this. And this is using pixel math. So if I go to image processing and pixel math, this brings up a dialog. And it maybe looks a bit ambiguous or confusing to begin with, but it's fairly straightforward. The first thing I do is I click on this plus sign here, and I'm going to select my starless image. So I'm just going to basically double click on it. So it's the proc starless. And then I'm going to select the stars only image. So again, plus. And remember we did that proc star mask, double click. And then there's a formula that you can use in pixel math to bring the two images together. So I'm going to go here and basically paste in this formula. And so what the formula is it says invert the images, multiply them together, invert the results, and then this leverages the properties of the screen function to create a bright combined image where the bright areas of both images are preserved and enhanced. So I definitely encourage you to play around with this. I'll even put this formula in the description of the video so you can see. So let's get started. So the first thing is there's under the images, there's a variable name here. So Pixel Math automatically selected for the starless image a variable called starless, and there it is in the formula, starless. But for the star mask, you see the formula name is I1. So I'm going to select this where it says star mask, and instead type in I1, And then I'm going to click on apply. And then if I close this, you can see what it's done is it's actually brought those two images together very nicely, in fact. And so you can see some of this outer nebula in Messier 27. And if I zoom in using the mouse wheel, remember we did that star aberration correction early on. We've got some fairly nice round stars. If I hold down the control button on my Windows keyboard and the left mouse button and drag, and then zoom out using the mouse wheel, we've got some nice nebula presence in the image as well. You could argue maybe there's a bit of mottling in the background if you zoom in here, look. And you can always go into either GIMP or Affinity or Photoshop and do a slight background darkening in your image. And so we'll go ahead and do that in the next stage. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to save this image. And this time I'm going to save it as a TIFF file. And we'll just leave it as this pixel math result.tiff for all intents and purposes. Click on save. And I'm going to save it as a 16-bit ready for Photoshop to process. Click on save. And the next thing I'm going to do is open up my Photoshop. And then I'm going to actually go ahead and open up that TIFF file in Photoshop. And you can see there, if I zoom in a little bit in Photoshop, there's that sort of little bit of mottling in the background. So what I'm going to do is first, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to do Control-J in Windows to duplicate the layer. And I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, and Levels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of darken this background level a little bit. I'm going to do it by color channel. So I'm going to choose here, first the red, and I'm going to back off the red a little bit, just a very slight drag on the red channel, then the green, and kind of back that off a little bit, and then the blue, and drag that over just a little bit. And if you look at the histogram up here, the colors kind of align quite nicely in the histogram. There's no emphasis on any one color over the other. So I click on OK. And you see that background mottling is definitely very, very slightly reduced in the image. The other thing that I like to do in Photoshop, which you can also do similarly in Affinity or GIMP or any other of those tools, is there is a filter, Photoshop, and it's Camera Raw Filter. And if I bring up that dialog, and I'm going to click here to zoom in a little bit, maybe zoom back out, use my mouse wheel to zoom in, and I can adjust the saturation. I can go crazy here, go all the way to the right, and it looks really kind of oversaturated, just almost unnatural looking to my eyes. So maybe take this down to about, let's say 20. And then there's a vibrance setting here. So this kind of adjusts the vibrance of the colors. Again, if I go all the way to the right, it's just overkill. But if I kind of back this off and make it around 10, and then the last one is a thing called clarity down here, which kind of emphasizes some of the contrast in the image. Again, if I go all the way to the right here, it's way, way over contrasted. So usually I just sort of back this off to around 5, click OK. And you can see we've kind of adjusted the image just a little bit more. And there you have it. So I went through using Siril to do separation using StarNet in your image, in the Siril Python scripts, recombined it using an option that's called Pixel Math. Again, there are other ways you can recombine. And then I finished up in Photoshop. So hopefully that gives you just a few ideas on playing around with Siril, StarNet, and any of those other star removal options and Photoshop. Thank you very much.